Willem Heath, born on the 13th of January 1945 and died on the 9th of October 2024. We are here to pay our respects to the deceased, because the word respect literally means to have a second look. Respect. Look back. Look again. So this is the time for us. And that's why we gathered here. Because the life of Willem Heath speaks of somebody who made a contribution towards not only his family, but a very special contribution towards the judiciary, the society, and even the country as a whole. So a few thoughts. Let me start with Willem Heath being born, and being born in the Christian faith. Most of us are born into a religion. You haven't got a choice. And he was born into the Christian faith in 1945. He received the Bible from an aunt when he was 6 years old, with a text there written as well from Psalm 190, verse 33 to 35, which says, "From the mouth come knowledge." To develop a spirituality of what I call here on the program, a spirituality of quiet and quest, you need to ask the right questions. So in his life he moved on. I believe that he moved from a place of certainty, of assurance, to a place of questions. And to understand that, I think one should make a picture of life, of space and time. We know it's relative, space and time. But in this relative life of space and time, place and moment is very relevant. And he came to a place in his life, a place here in Stellenberg, and he experienced moments of contact with God in a different way than before. A place of quiet and a place of questions. The point is, there's nothing wrong with it. On the contrary, that's the way it should be. If we understand life as a spacious entity, we have to move around, we have to change.
I think Willem, history will be kind to Willem. Be very kind to Willem. I hope somebody takes the opportunity to write his life story, so that South Africans could learn, all South Africans, from a great man, a man of integrity, a man of wisdom, and a man of a sharp intellect, who must have been deeply frustrated in the last few months of his life to go through that very difficult period. I will always remember him as a great man, as a wonderful Afrikaner from the community. And because, he was an Afrikaner, I think the best way to pay tribute to him is to actually, rather than read you, refer you to one of the great Afrikaner poets who really believed in the language of Afrikaans. Some of you may know him was C.J. Langenhoven. And he wrote the most beautiful poem. And the poem was called Die Onbekende Weg. In other words, the unknown road. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the poem, but I'm going to leave it to you in your quiet moment to read the poem. And what he was really saying to Judge Heath as we bid him farewell. The road ahead is long. The road behind us is very short. It's baie kort. We can hear people, but we can't really hear them. We can see people, but we can't really see them. When we die, when we go on into the afterlife, so to speak. And it is very lonely. That life is very lonely. The road ahead is very lonely. But what will ultimately carry you, which is what C.J. Langehoven implied, in that road ahead, is to have lived an absolute life of integrity and to have always had a good heart along the way, because that will carry you into what he referred to as the onbekende weg.
The head of the SIU, Advocate Mutivi, would have liked to have been here, but he's currently out of the country, so he has asked me to come and say a few words on behalf of the SIU. It's an honor for the SIU to commemorate or reflect, thank you, Dominique, that was excellent, on the life of the judge, as we all refer to him at the time when he was still with us at the SIU. We like to commemorate this occasion because he is really, and I mean there's no doubt about that, he is the father of the SIU. And some would argue, but I would say the SIU is the biggest legacy that the judge has left on the South African landscape. He had the vision, and he had the effort, the willingness to put in the effort to create an entity which would become an additional weapon in the fight against corruption and maladministration. His idea, his vision of using the principles of the application of civil law as a weapon in fighting corruption and maladministration was very innovative. As we went on through the years, 28 years down the line, it is still something that is innovative out there and not known in many countries, in most countries around the world, that you can actually use this concept of application of civil law with its lower burden of proof as a weapon in the fight against corruption and maladministration. So it all started very small. There was no staff, no infrastructure, no nothing in June 1995 when Judge Heath called me to his chambers there in Bishu, which was then the capital of what was known as the Ciskei. And he then asked me to be the evidence leader of this new commission of inquiry that was going to be formed. And he was asked to lead this commission of inquiry. It was a sort of a brainchild, the idea of a commission of the then MEC of Public Works in the old homeland Ciskei, MEC Tobile Kahle, who then persuaded the Premier of the Eastern Cape Province, Raymond Klaba, to appoint this commission of inquiry. This commission of inquiry, of course, went on. It worked from 95 to 97, and then national legislation was passed, and the first SIU, known commonly in those days as the Heath SIU, came to light. And you know, it was certainly interesting times for all of us to see this organization growing and growing. It has grown to the extent that now, from absolute scratch where there was nothing, The SIU currently has 735 employees in all 9 provinces across the country, and it is generally regarded as the leading anti-corruption agency in South Africa. This is the legacy that Willem Heath left on the South African landscape in this fight against the scourge of corruption. He left a legacy. He might have left several pieces of legacy, but the one legacy that I can attest to, the Special Investigating Unit, he is the father of that. He left it. It's still there. It is stronger than ever, and it is making a difference in the fight against corruption and maladministration. So his legacy continues.
The quote by Martin Luther King, it says, "The arc of a moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." For me, that is what Willem Heath was about. He was about justice. I want to say rest in peace, Judge Willem Heath. Your legacy of compassion and equality will live on in the lives you touched and the hearts you changed. Thank you for showing me the way to a better tomorrow.
The first time I encountered Willem, and I knew that there's something different about the man, was a case that I argued in front of 3 judges in Grahamstown. And the judges basically treated my submissions with contempt. Nothing short of contempt. I argued the exactly same point before Willem and another judge, Judge Liebenberg, who was then acting. And it was on the basic point I was trying to make, was that in a criminal matter, by definition, a trial could not be fair if the accused person did not have legal representation. And if they couldn't afford it, it had to be provided by the state. As I say, the Grahamstown judges treated my arguments with contempt, so did the appeal court in Bloemfontein. But Willem gave another judgment. Willem gave another judgment. And about 3 or 4 years later, after what Gerard referred to the coup, we introduced a public defender decree, which in fact codified, put into law, what Willem's judgment had been back in about 1988. So for about 4 years, Ciskei was the only part of South Africa that actually required every accused person to have someone defending them. And if they couldn't afford it, the state had to provide it. And that, of course, is now part of our Constitution. If you read, I think it's section 35 of our Constitution, what a fair trial is. And what is there? The right to legal representation. And that goes back to 1988. Willem was the only judge in the country that was prepared to stick his, because he had a deep sense of what's just. He grasped the argument immediately. In fact, Judge Liebenberg that morning really gave me a hard time. After lunch, Judge Liebenberg had also changed, and I still suspect, I haven't spoken to Judge Liebenberg about that, but that Willem Heath spoke to him during lunchtime, and he changed. So that is legal representation. Another profoundly radical judgment, that he's really received no recognition. We will now say, of course, well, how else can it be? But a case came before him, and the question he had to decide was whether or not marital rape was possible. In other words, could a husband be convicted of rape of his wife? Now, for the lawyers amongst you, the common law went hundreds of years back, saying that's not possible, because that's part of the contract between the husband and the wife, conjugal rights. Willem Heath wrote a judgment. Just a brief extract from it. The fiction of consent and even irrevocable consent by a wife to intercourse with her husband has no foundation in law. Now, he was wrong there. It did have a foundation in law, and it went to the appeal court, and the appeal court reversed his decision. But the second part, and offends against the burning mores of any civilized society, there he was right. The absence of consent to sexual intercourse cannot and should not be ignored. To withhold consent to sexual intercourse unilaterally may be contrary to marital obligation, but the marital obligation does not, however, entitle the husband to take the law into his own hands by having intercourse with his wife against her will. Now, that judgment of his went on appeal. The state took it on appeal. I don't know whether you actually took it on appeal or whether it was Yuri. And the appeal court overturned it, said no, hundreds of years of common law. You can't have such thing as marital rape. What then happened in about 1993 is legislation was passed to overturn the AD decision in effect and to say, yes, you can have marital rape.